Hello, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, real life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, Bravo lover, covering all things that you want to hear about. Welcome to another episode. Today, I am going to talk about Real Housewives of Orange County. Not only am I going to talk about it, I'm going to give my clinical interpretations of each housewife, including Taylor, because I know people feel that the season was a little lackluster. They're feeling a little bored. But I actually find the women so incredibly interesting, especially what's been happening with, Shannon and her struggles. So all these women are very complex, and I maybe have a different um, assessment of the situation. So I wanted to share that with you and then see what you guys think. If you still feel like Orange County needs a reboot or you're done with it, I respect that. But I'm going to talk about that. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Southern Charm because, there is just so much to interpret there, number one. But number two, the Austen Taylor of it all, I actually have some interesting clinical insights that I think might explain what's happening a little bit. So we're going to get into that a little bit too. So before I start, I wanted to just do a little bit of housekeeping and just sincerely thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for whether it's watching and listening on YouTube or, downloading the podcast. I am new at this, as I've mentioned many times, and I just am overwhelmed with the love and support of some really amazing people who, I consider friends. And I, feel really proud of the community that I'm building. I'm just, sometimes the internet can be a nightmare, but all of the people, on my Instagram and who listen to the podcast, you're just all so wonderful. And I'm just really grateful for you all. So, I just wanted to give you a huge shout out, a huge thank you. Especially because, I went on Apple Podcasts and I've seen some people went there and put some really nice reviews. And what's funny is that it has been brought to my attention that I don't often promote myself. I guess I forget about it, or I just assume, I'm doing a job and this is what I'm doing. So, I often forget to say, hey, please give me a 5-star rating, things like that. So for those people who just went ahead and did that and also just said some really nice things, please know that I've read them. Thank you. I appreciate you. And if you are genuinely enjoying this podcast, I will tell you now, please go at wherever you listen to the podcast, please give it a 5-star review. You can also head over to YouTube and subscribe and, comment and things like that. Just thank you. I appreciate you all. And I get a lot of questions on Instagram about where people can find all of my content. So all of my content is on my YouTube channel and on my Instagram at Your Bish Therapist. So Your Bish Therapist on Instagram and on my YouTube channel. I have a link tree that if you just click that one link, it'll take you to every podcast that I've ever done. I have them all listed, the podcasts that I've done on Amy's pod, my own podcast, things like that. So if you're interested in looking at, I have some old episodes talking about a lot of different things. So go ahead, go on my social media, check that out, and I hope you find something that you like. So without further ado, let's get into it because this is going to be a long one. Okay. So what I'm going to do is start out by talking about each of the women individually and kind of my clinical interpretations or assessments of what I feel like may be going on with them. Because again, I do find these women so fascinating and so interesting, but it seems like as a whole, OC, people are just kind of feeling like it's a little bit tired. So, let me share some of my thoughts on this. And, I would love to hear what you think. So first, I'm going to start out talking about Heather Dubrow because I watched the finale of OC. Obviously I DVR it, But I watched it again the following day, knowing that I was going to do a podcast on this. And Peacock, for those of you who don't know, Peacock airs The Housewives the day after it airs on Bravo, but they often do extended cuts. And what is fascinating to me about that is there are times that I watch it and the extended cuts are they're just throwaways and you're like, oh, okay, I understand what they had to take that out. But there were some um, deleted scenes regarding Heather that I feel like explained a lot about her and I found fascinating. I mean, and I'm talking this was maybe a minute snippet, but it explained so much to me. And I think that it was such a disservice that it didn't air because people are always on Heather about being more open and vulnerable. And then she was, and then they cut it. So, that's interesting. So for those of you who didn't see it, don't worry, I'm going to explain what the deleted scenes were. Essentially it was Heather talking about growing up in an emotionally neglectful home. Now, I'm going to talk about emotional neglect, otherwise known as childhood emotional neglect, CEN for short. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those concepts, but first I'm going to explain, kind of what she said. So Heather essentially grew up in a home where she was not only emotionally neglected, which means so her feelings were never acknowledged. They were never discussed. She said she grew up in a home that was, I forget the words that she used, but it was emotionally kind of stunted. And what's interesting here is we have seen Heather's mom on the show, and she did appear, and this is just my observations from the small times that I've seen her on the show. She appears to be really harsh, incredibly critical, very passive aggressive, just unkind, and definitely not loving. And Heather has said before, and I don't know exactly when she said it, but she said, my mom loved me the best way that she knew how to love me, but it wasn't the kind of love that I needed. And that always piqued my interest with Heather because I just think that's such a beautiful insight. Because all of us, our parents are humans, and especially people of my age who may have grown up with parents of, the boomer generation or things like that. The only reason I bring that up is because, there is generational trauma here, right? So I'm 42. My grandfather is, by the way, he's still living. His 96th birthday is tomorrow, and he was in World War II. So he and my dad's generation, I think, they grew up in this generation where, kids are to be seen and not heard. Emotions aren't really talked about. They're certainly not valued. They're weak. There's all of these stereotypical tropes about emotions from older generations. And so what I appreciate about what's happening now is that is starting to shift because so many people have been negatively impacted by generational trauma of families pretending that emotions don't happen. Or if they do happen, you're a crazy person for feeling something because we're not feeling it. I don't understand. So essentially, that's what Heather was saying that she grew up with. And so not only were her emotions neglected, she was also teased for experiencing emotions. And the reason why that is so important is because it's not only what didn't happen, it's being teased and kind of, getting the message from your family that like, we are robots, meet more, we are robots. And if you're not, there's something wrong with you. And in reality, for all the people listening to this who grew up in situations like that, who were the scapegoats of the family, who, felt like you just didn't belong. Well, you didn't. And that was probably a good thing because when you're a sensitive soul and you're an emotional being, that's a beautiful, wonderful gift. And unfortunately, that's gotten weaponized by our families at some points. But I'm here to tell you that that is a gift and there's nothing wrong with you. And in fact, being sensitive, you're amazing. So the result of what Heather shared, it helped me understand her very much. And so I will share with you, when people typically are emotionally neglected growing up, or they're teased for having emotions and things like that, the result is they become highly perfectionistic, because when children don't receive the love that they need, they don't stop loving their parents or the people around them. They stop loving themselves. So there are probably many people listening to this who have childhood trauma, who have inner child wounds that you've just never dealt with. And, just sending love to all the people who are sincerely dealing with that, because you deserve love, you deserve support. And just because the people who were tasked to do that growing up didn't, doesn't mean you can't have that now. So the results of that kind of treatment are, again, people who are highly perfectionistic. Um, you know, Heather most likely had to prove herself continually. So I think where we see Heather, we see this very kind of icy exterior. We see someone who has their guard up. We see someone who's very put together, prim and proper, uses her words very carefully. She's very thoughtful. Guess what? Those can be great qualities, but I believe that they developed from this family of origin issues that she had. I believe that Heather essentially never felt safe to experience her emotions and to share them. And so that is why we see Heather the way that we see her, right? Doesn't that all make so much sense? And the other thing that happens when our emotions are ignored growing up, we tend to ignore our own emotions and just pretend like we don't have them, but we're humans and we all have them a lot. So essentially, I feel what we see here is Heather is sensitive. And one of the deleted scenes, she was talking to, I think it was Gina, about, I am very sensitive. And Gina's like, well, sometimes your presentation is very incongruent with that. Well, she didn't say incongruent. I'm saying that. But so I'm here to share with you that the reason why, Heather's her presentation is different than her internal experiences because of her family of origin trauma, then I'm going to go ahead and assume maybe she never dealt with as deeply as she needed to. Sometimes we, feel we go to therapy, we address things, or we don't go to therapy, we read books, we journal, what have you. And we think we've addressed things, and then something else comes up and it's like, maybe I didn't address this as much as I should. No shame. It's just our body's way of coming back to us and telling us, hey, we need to do a little check-in. So I think that Heather is the way that she is because of this trauma. And it really is trauma, because it's not only, people think that trauma is what did happen, whether it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, what have you. But there is such a huge part of trauma that most people don't even understand, which is it's not what did happen, it's the absence of the good things that didn't happen. And that is equally as important as the stuff that did happen, right? All of the emotional validation that Heather never received, the emotional support and, expression and all of that, she was essentially starved for, all of that growing up. And I think that it shows. But what I think is amazing is that when we have family of origin issues and we haven't totally worked them out, what we end up doing is reestablishing our family dynamics as adults, like in our workplace, with our friend groups. And what I do want to say is really fascinating is I think it's interesting that Heather is putting herself in the same situation that she grew up in, where people are, attacking her, not validating her emotions, trying to, sincerely, it feels like nothing that she can do is right. And I truly think that's just because she doesn't fit in an OC. I think that Heather has real LVP vibes in a lot of ways. I'm not a fan of LVP, and I do like Heather, but I just think that Heather would fit in better in Beverly Hills. I'm going to be honest. I think that she, when you get to a point that you're ultra wealthy, you're just not going to fit in with certain people anymore. I mean, you can be, I think, as humble and grateful. I mean, I wouldn't know because I'm definitely not wealthy, but, I think that she just kind of is putting herself in a very similar dynamic, and it's not serving her. And that's why she's so frustrated. I almost, wish that someone would, have her listen to this, because I think it would, kind of like set off a few alarm bells. Because all that Heather keeps doing is just trying to prove that she's good enough. She's trying to prove that, she feels misunderstood. And that's another thing that happens with childhood emotional neglect is you become a people pleaser in some ways, and then you feel like you continually are misunderstood. You have to explain. And, I think that's what Heather's doing as well. So now I think that, for those people listening to this who some light bulbs went off as I'm talking about it, never fear. If you find yourself in a situation where you have recreated your family dynamic at work or with your friend group, and in Heather's case, both of these, because her friend group is her work, which is, not often the case, but, just take some observations, just notice it. And focus on the things that when you know better, you can do better. We can't do better until we know better. I mean, sincerely, we just can't. Until you are aware of what's happening in the issues, you can't make changes. So awareness is the first step. If you're getting that from this, great. I'm wonderful. Be easy on yourself and take it step by step. This is not something that you fix overnight. So the other thing that I want to say regarding Heather and people who experience childhood emotional neglect is that people tend to, with a perfectionism can come I am not diagnosing Heather at all. I'm just explaining what we can see with people who have experienced this. So there is an increase in anxiety disorders because you're just trying to, be perfect, and, it can kind of develop this obsessive compulsive tendency, or this tendency to be hypervigilant and hyper aware so that you can protect yourself and you can explain yourself. It really is complex. But the other thing that we see is increase in depression as well, because imagine, for those of you who have experienced this, you don't have to imagine, but what it feels like growing up in a family where you just don't belong. I mean, you feel like an alien. You feel so isolated. You feel like you're the problem. They all have managed to figure out something that you haven't. And it is a real mind fuck, pardon my language, but it really is. So I just think that, if any of this has resonated with you, just let it wash over you. Just start to be aware of it and how that might be playing itself out in your daily life. I think that Heather, the one thing that I want to say about Heather that I really love is she has 2 children who are in the LGBT plus community. Her son is trans, and her daughter, I believe, is gay. If I'm not getting that exactly right, I'm sorry. But the point is that Heather, when they have shown scenes of her with her children, she is so patient and kind and loving, and she listens. And I feel that people don't often understand how powerful it is when you didn't receive the love that you needed, when you were emotionally neglected, physically abused, sexually abused, whatever it is, and you can do for your kids, you can be the person for your children or children you love that you didn't get. There is something super powerful and healing in that as well. And so it tells me that Heather is an amazing person, that she's raising amazing children. And, justice for Heather. I just feel like, she is misunderstood, and I think she's a really lovely person. And, I think her and Tamara, to be honest, are just fighting for top dog status. So that's what I'm going to go into next, because I think I've talked about Heather long enough. I'm going to talk about Tamara because obviously, she was put on pause, and now she's on play. And here's the thing, Tamara came to play and get paid. Okay. So that is what she came to do. She came to do her job. She came to be the best housewife that she can be. And to be honest, I think that she is two different people. I think she's one person on the show and she's another person off the show. And, what I think is happening, people are irritated at Tamara. They're like, same old bullshit behavior, blah, blah, blah. But I think that this is why people maybe aren't receiving her as well this time for her comeback, is because to me, there's a little bit of feeling of inauthenticity, right? It's like, I think Tamara, I listen to Two Teas in a Pod. I do subscribe to that because, I enjoy Teddy. I enjoy Tamara. I'm not one of those people who just loves to hate housewives. And I know people really don't like Teddy, but so I do listen to that. And I think that Tamara is an amazingly kind and sweet person, but on the Housewives, she's there to do a job and be a villain. And she's very good at that too. So my interpretation, I don't know if this resonates with you. If it does, please let me know. But I think that the inauthenticity people are picking up is the fact that she is just doing a job. And this is not necessarily who she is. And I think also that's why Jen continues to be so confused, because it's like Jen is seeing a totally different person off camera. And then all of a sudden is like, why am I your storyline? Like, what has happened here? She's doing her job. What can I say about that? I think it is wild that Two Teas in a Pod became evidence in Heather's, the whole Losergate thing. But since I listened to Two Teas in a Pod, I'm going to tell you that I think that Heather, so back when Tamara started this, so when Tamara was off the show, Heather told Andy that Tamara shouldn't or couldn't come back because now she has this platform and Heather Dubrow felt it wouldn't be fair or something like that. So I find it very interesting that Heather is using Two Teas in a Pod for evidence to show that she didn't say the loser thing and that Tamara said it or what have you. So I don't care who said the loser thing. To me, that's, we may never find out exactly who it was first. It's whoever you want to believe. And I don't get lost in the details of that. But I think that what this tells me is that Heather is still pissed. She feels that, Tamara has this major platform, which she does. Two Teas in a Pod. I mean, their listenership is huge. So I think Heather might be a little bit envious of that. And number two, I think she's just mad about, you get to do all this stuff. Like, why are you so special? So I do think there is this competitive kind of issue between Tamara and Heather for A, the top dog spot, and B, then just what I mentioned with Two Teas in a Pod. Heather is the type of person, and usually with everything that I've described about her, when you grow up in those situations, fairness and equity become very, very important to you because you have felt your whole life like things have been unfair or unjust. So, adults sometimes can turn into these warriors of like fairness and equity, and not in a way of advocacy, just meaning like, well, that's not fair. This isn't fair. Why does Tamara have this job on Two Teas in a Pod and on, Housewives? I don't think that's fair. So I do think maybe that's a little bit of it for Heather. And, as far as Tamara, that's really my only interpretation. Because like I said, I think that who she is on the show, I think is just a character. And I don't know who Tamara is off the show because I'm not friends with her and I'm not privy to that. I mean, I get to hear on Two Teas in a Pod, which by the way is called Twats for those of you who maybe heard me say that and you're like, what is it? So it's TWOTS. Two T's, get it? They call them the Twats. So I'm not being wildly disrespectful. That's what they call themselves. Okay, so we're going to go to Jen because again, Jen and Tamara have had a really wild season. What I want to say about Jen is that sincerely, this woman is my favorite new housewife to come on the scene ever. And the reason why is I am really drawn to people who have healthy, healing, authentic energy. And to me, Jen is a true embodiment of that. her ability to lead with love, compassion, and understanding, no matter what Tamara's doing to her. I know people think that that's kind of not a good thing, but I'm going to tell you why it is. People are going to say and do whatever they're going to do, right? We only can keep our side of the street clean. And I think, Jen, when you have worked on healing and you really are in touch with yourself, you realize that, someone being upset with you doesn't give you the excuse to verbally eviscerate them or throw a napkin in their face or whatever it is. Jen gets that. And I just feel that she is such a beautiful soul. Now, she has self-admitted she's a people pleaser. So obviously, she grew up, I'm interested to hear more of her backstory. Her mom seems amazing, but she has self-identified as a people pleaser and has said that she does need to be more assertive, which I agree with. But I think that they're two separate issues. And so I think that even if she did become more assertive, which I think she has towards the end of the season, when she cried and she confronted Tamara at the dinner and all of that, setting boundaries and standing up for yourself doesn't mean destroying people. Okay. So I love Jen's quiet health. It's just so attractive to me. Plus she is very attractive. I will say that. I mean, Jen is a beautiful woman. So the things that I want to say about Jen, and I did another podcast about this, is that can we just let Jen be? So everyone has shared their concerns about Ryan, and it's enough already. Like, we get it. We know the concerns. We see the concerns, right? We saw Ryan show up to the, Gina circus party wearing no shirt. That's who Ryan is. He's just like happy to be douchey, and that's what he's into, and that's fine. And if Jen's into that, that's fine too. I think people around her want to protect her, but my message is that the only reason that we realize things or make changes is because we fall flat on our face and then we get up and we say, okay, I need to do this different. So we can't prevent Jen from whatever consequences of her relationship she's going to have. But here's the thing. The other reason why I can tell you that Jen is amazing, her fear towards Ryan is actually a healthy and appropriate response. She didn't get divorced from Will and then just she could have married Ryan. She could have already been engaged. But Jen has a healthy and appropriate fear. And Jen knows. Jen has the same concerns that we all have. She has them. She shares those concerns. She fears essentially that love is not enough. And guess what? She's right. She is right to question Ryan a million times because love is not enough. Love is great, but that cannot be the only thing that sustains a long-term relationship, especially when you have children involved. And you can tell Jen loves those kids so much, and she does not want to put them through another divorce and separation. You can just tell she's so frozen in fear, and I feel so bad for her, but I just want her to know, and anyone else listening to this, is that that's an appropriate response. People who go from relationship to relationship and they hop and they hop and they don't think about it, and then they get into a disastrous situation, those are the people who are letting trauma lead them. Jen is really trying to let her health lead her, but she's in a relationship with someone who just has a ton of red flags. He just does. But I'm going to say something kind of controversial. Ryan is a better boyfriend to Jen than John is to Shannon. Boom. I'm going to say it. We may not love Ryan, or we may think he's a little douchey, but he is such a good partner to Jen. I mean, he listens to her. He, he does not get defensive when she brings these issues up. He doesn't get mad. He talks about them. They have more communication than Shannon and John have. So, I think we all just have to let Jen and Ryan do what they're going to do. Jen, her fears too are accurate in that people do fall out of love, or they do change their minds, or sometimes love isn't enough. But what Jen has to realize is you just have to pick a lane. You have to pick a lane and you have to commit. And if you really are feeling that reticent, then maybe that's a sign that you do need to take a break. But either way, only Jen can make that decision for herself. Tamara can't force her to make that decision. Jen's mom, there's no one that can force Jen to make that decision except for Jen. So I adore Jen. I think she's amazing. I hope, to see her back next season. And I would really look forward to getting to know her backstory a little bit more, because I think there's a lot to be determined there. It seemed like she had an okay relationship with Will, but there wasn't, a flame. There wasn't a lot of, there was respect and love, but it wasn't, I don't get the sense that there was a lot of passion. So I'm interested to figure out maybe why she chose Will. And then, also, I think sometimes people literally overcorrect. And so I think Jen went from, I had no passion in my marriage, to like, I want all passion, because I think Ryan probably is a lot of passion. I mean, from what I gather from their sexual chemistry, which mazel, good. I hope they are, enjoying each other. But I just wanted to kind of like explore that a little bit more. Okay, so now moving on to Gina. I love Gina. I think that Gina is amazing, and I don't understand why people give her such a hard time. I truly don't. But here's my assessment of Gina, and I've said this once before too. Gina, I believe, had unresolved post-traumatic stress disorder from the situation with Matt. Okay. So what people need to understand about Gina is that Gina essentially was a regular person. So like me, right? Gina grew up in Staten Island. She and her ex, they got married at a young age and they moved to LA. They had this family. And as someone who lives on the East Coast, I live in Pennsylvania, which is about 2 hours from New York. And what I can tell you about regular people from this area is that there is a sense of pride people have in maintaining relationships. And when you get married, that's taken very seriously. I know things are different in LA, but here, East Coast mentality is a little, very different in a lot of ways. So I think that people in LA, who are like used to a million divorces, they don't always understand how the breakdown of Gina's, what she thought was her forever family, it completely destroyed her brain. And Gina didn't recognize it. She didn't want to recognize it. I think she was in denial about it. I think she was like so traumatized that there's these responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I don't have time to go into all of those, but I think that she was kind of freezing and fawning, meaning she was just feeling like really stuck because she didn't know where else to go. So I believe that situation with Matt, there was police were called. He was arrested. We don't know what happened there. She hasn't really talked about it, but it was alleged that there was some sort of physical abuse, and that, he had developed some issues with alcohol and it just turned him into a different person. So I think she had unresolved PTSD. She began relying on alcohol to self-medicate, and that led her to get her DUI, which was, I believe, from what she has said, her rock bottom. Because what happened after the DUI is she said, you know what? I got to look at this. This isn't me. I'm not proud of this. I got to take accountability for my stuff and I got to do better. And my God, did she? She dropped alcohol. I did see a recent, she did a podcast where she talked about, she doesn't identify as an alcoholic, but she realized that alcohol was playing a problematic role in her life, which great. You don't have to, the label doesn't have to be there. It can just be as simple as I was making bad decisions and it was not good for me. So she got it out of her life. She's been sober for 2 years. And I think that shows. She has something similar to Jen, where to me, when people are working on healing and being their best selves, to me, they just emit this energy that attracts me like a moth to a flame. And sincerely, Gina does emit that energy. I think that, this season, her crying about Matt and things like that, people were very critical, but make no mistake, that was her still processing her trauma. Gina admitted on this season that she really hadn't done that as much as she felt that she needed to. So, it's not that she doesn't love Travis. She does. And by the way, I adore Travis. Travis may be one of my favorite house um, partners. I'm not going to say husband because they're not married, but to maybe ever be on the show. I think he adores Gina. I think he is a very sweet person. And I just think they're great together. And her issues with the past have nothing to do with her not loving Travis. I just think that now she's in a better place. Now she realized she needed to get her house in order, and she has. So I hope that, Gina is able to be happy and move forward, because my God, do her and Travis, they deserve that. The last thing I want to say about Gina before we move on to Shannon is that I think, I said this, I did a podcast called Addiction Among Housewives, and I talked about Shannon and Shannon's DUI. But my theory that I posed was that I believe that Shannon kept holding the help that she gave Gina. She helped Gina get out of her not get out of it, but deal with it. And I think that Shannon kept holding that over Gina because it was the only thing that made Shannon feel superior. And I'm going to talk about her in a minute. But so, Shannon continually coming for Gina, I think, was because of Shannon's issues. And, it really didn't have anything to do with Gina. So let's get into that. So if you didn't listen to my episode, A, go back and listen to it, but B, I'll give you a brief synopsis. So what I said in that episode, my podcast before the Orange County aired, I said that I believed that Shannon was profoundly unhappy. And after watching this episode, that was confirmed. So in this episode, Shannon says, and I quote, "My kids are gone and it's hitting me now. I'm going to lose it. I don't want to be alone and I want us to make it." Okay, so let me break this down. Here, over the past couple of maybe year, Shannon went from, so her divorce from David, which was a messy disaster, finalized. Okay. So she still had her girls at home. So now her girls are home. So she's divorced. Her kids are gone. Her kids being gone and her being divorced also now means she has financial pressure, which I'm going to guess she's not super accustomed to having, which, is a privilege, but, that still sucks. And she's also clearly having relationship issues with John Jansen. So I feel that all of these issues coalesced at one time and just completely pushed Shannon over the edge. I think that her relationship with John, she doesn't want to be alone, and John has not been able to meet her needs. He just has not been able to. He, it seems like, is not extremely loving. He's a little withholding. He always wants to go home. And here's the thing. Fine. I'm not here to roast John Jansen. Whatever you want in a relationship is fine. But the problem is he is unable to give Shannon what she wants and needs, but they both are just still trying to make it work. And so when we do that, we're just going to be profoundly unhappy. And listen, have we all done that? Have I done that in past relationships? Sure. Relationships that, again, love isn't enough. You just want it to work, but it just doesn't. And when you continue to try to make it work, it just gets toxic and ugly. I think that her and John, unfortunately, are toxic. And John is just not able to give her what she needs. And Shannon is not willing to accept that because she doesn't want to be alone. So she drinks to overcompensate, and boom, there you have it. For Shannon, my hope is that she is able to truly address this all, because until she does, you can do a million things to self-medicate, whether it's alcohol, food, substances, shopping, and I imagine, shopping among women like this, that people have joked about retail therapy and stuff like that, but shopping addiction is very real and it can really get out of control. So whatever, there's always going to be something else for Shannon to do to maladaptively cope. And I just hope she gives herself the gift of coping. The other thing that I wanted to say that is something that my little therapist brain caught that, I don't know if other people did. So Shannon and John, when they were getting ready to go to Gina's party, they kept talking about this hat. Okay, the hat. Shannon picked out John's outfit and it had a hat and he didn't like the hat. Okay, so all night, you kept hearing these little snippets of him saying, I hate this hat, I don't want to put it on. And Shannon from the other room being like, put it on. Like it was very comical. It was like a who's on first kind of bit. And here's the thing, while it was funny, I believe it is a metaphor for what's happening in their relationship. Okay. So essentially, Shannon's doing something without, she wants John to do something, right? Which is wear this hat. And John just won't do it, right? It's a simple request. I don't know why he didn't want to do it, but he just didn't want to do it. And so they're both in this stalemate of, I don't want to do it, put on the hat. I don't want to do it, put on the hat. And it just became this they even shared a snippet of, in a deleted scene where John came up to Shannon and he was still complaining hours later about this hat. And she's like, just go put it down somewhere. So what I feel like is happening in the relationship is that neither of them are considering each other's needs or wants. There's complaints, no solutions, and no compromise. Boom. That's their entire relationship problems. And yes, I gathered that from these teeny little comments about a hat, because that's what therapists do. It makes sense. I fully and wholly, think that's what's going on. And I just think that they both deserve better. And whatever happens, I hope that they're both happy. The last thing I'll say is I love the Cytolonic idea about the, well, it's not an enema. I guess it was I forget, there was another word Shannon used, but how amazing of a friend is Jen to do that on camera? She did a enema on camera to try to support Shannon. I was like, well, that is friendship. That is love. That is real friendship. But sincerely, I think Shannon's smart. I think she has a lot of good ideas. I think she can be a great businesswoman. I hope the Cytolonic idea is wildly amazing and she is happy, because we all deserve to be happy. Okay. Emily. I'm going to go on to Emily now. So Emily, I feel the same way about Emily as I do about Gina and Jen, is that I love her emotional health. And the thing is, people online commented to me something about, oh, Emily had a bad episode, and they're like, well, what do you think now? And it's like, I need people to understand super clearly that emotionally healthy people still make mistakes. They're still human. They're still going to do things that aren't, appropriate. But the difference is they're going to take accountability. They're going to apologize in a very real way and just work on doing better the next time. That's literally all we can hope for. So Emily's not perfect. Neither am I. Neither is anybody. And healing isn't linear, meaning it's not like you heal and then you're this perfect person. You're not. You're still going to continue to screw up and make mistakes. So that's what I have to say about Emily. I think that she is genuinely always trying to be better. In fact, I think she said that in one of her confessionals, is that she's just trying to be accountable. She's trying to be authentic, and she's trying to just be better and do better. And my God, if that's not the greatest way to approach life. Plus, she discussed all season about her generational trauma, her childhood trauma, how that's impacted her as an adult. And we all know I love to talk about generational trauma. I love people who understand and are aware of their trauma and how that's affected them. Again, I just think that's so amazing. She opened up about, so the Losergate thing was, did Tamara say it? Did Heather Dubrow say it? Which is weird, because I thought Heather Dubrow already admitted that she did say it, but she was saying it about Noella. So I'm a little bit confused there. But she opened up about how being called a loser, Emily sincerely cried about this and said it triggered her because of her childhood trauma. And it just made me so sad. I was so grateful for her, though, for her to share that, because it shows that words hurt. And, when I used to teach, I've had a lot of experiences in my career, and I used to teach younger elementary kids about, gambling and, psychological, it was to their level, but it was a kind of about emotional health and coping. And I was a gambling prevention specialist, and we talked about gambling, things like that. It was a program that I did in Philadelphia. But my point is that I used to do this exercise where you squeeze out toothpaste onto a plate, and you ask the kids to get it back in. And obviously you can't. And that is a metaphor for the words that come out of our mouth. We can't put them back in. Once it's out of the tube, that's it. And it really is a good example and description of how words do hurt. And when these housewives just say reckless things, like Kelly Dodd is probably the most prominent example that I could think of. They just say these reckless things when they're hurt. It is the most gross characteristic. I personally can't stand it. It's it it it's not good. And I think that Emily really opened up honestly and authentically about how the being called a loser by anybody, it really triggered her, because when you grow up and you are abused, neglected, whatever it is, you don't, I already mentioned this, you don't stop loving your parents, you stop loving yourself. So it's being called a loser, being talked about negatively. It triggered her childhood wounds. And I love that she was open about that. So also let's just use that as just a friendly reminder that words matter. And they're very hurtful. And I just think that we need to be mindful of that. And when we get upset and we weaponize words to hurt people, that's just a really terrible thing to do. And, I'm sure, we've all done it, but all you can do is try to understand that and do better from here. The last thing that I want to say about Emily is that Shane is sincerely the only person on Bravo that has ever changed my mind. So normally when I see someone new come on the scene, or I see someone on TV, it takes me about a minute to kind of get a general sense. Like, that's just how my brain works. That's just how I work. Shane is the only person I was ever wrong about. Is that I think that Shane, at first, he just seemed really miserable. He had he was, studying for the bar and he kept failing. And, Emily was unhappy with him. And so I was taking her lead with that. But Shane is amazing. I think he's a great husband. I think he and Emily have a beautiful relationship. I think he's a wonderful dad. I think he's so smart. I love his dry sense of humor. So I do just want to admit that I've never been wrong about anybody else but Shane. So I guess I have a 99.9% rating. I guess he brings my track record down with that. Okay, now before I move on to Southern Charm, I'm just going to talk about Taylor really quick. So Taylor, she's a friend of, for those who don't know, she started on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. She was on seasons 1 to 3. She was the person who threw a $60,000 birthday party for her daughter, Kennedy. Her husband, Russell, it came to find out there was a lot of fraud. He owed a lot of people money. And he, on the show, completed suicide. But Taylor has come forth and kind of alluded to in a lot of different interviews. You'd have to listen to them to catch it, but she's alluded to that she actually believes that he was murdered. And she doesn't talk about it much, and I'm assuming she can't really talk about it much, and she's probably scared to talk about it, but I think that's a really interesting backstory to Taylor. So she left after season 3 because I think just with the whole, her Russell dying and, going through all that trauma, I just think she needed a break. And then she came back on Real Housewives of Orange County. And in 2022, she also did a Real Housewives Ultimate Girls Trip. So I think personally, just like Heather, I think would fit in better on Beverly Hills. I think Taylor fits in better here in OC. And in fact, she has stated that like her and Shannon are like BFF. So I just think Taylor fits in better here. And I also love that she brings a smidge of diversity, because the thing about Orange County that I don't love is that it's not diverse. I mean, everyone is white and blonde and, okay. Emily and Heather have brown hair, but you get my point. So I think that she brings a little diversity because she is bisexual and proud of it. She talks about her bisexuality and, as an advocate and an ally, I'm like, great, wonderful. I love that. Also, Taylor had 2 very iconic moments when she was once on Beverly Hills, where she kind of deep throated this cotton candy, but in the finale episode of Orange County, she did the same thing with ice cream. And I was like, oh my goodness, that girl, she's something else. So I just thought that was really cute. Okay. Now, On to, I'm going to switch really quick here because we don't, this has been a long one already, but I'm going to talk a little bit about Southern Charm. So here's what I think is going on with Southern Charm. Okay. So Austen and Taylor had this kind of weird do we or don't we moment. And apparently they both claim that nothing had ever happened. But if you're having a moment where you're like, should we do this? It's confusing because it's like, well, what precipitated that? So I'm going to explain what I think might be going on here. So Austen, when he was 7 years old, he and his family had just moved to South Carolina, and he and his older sister, Kyle, and mom and dad, they went on a hike. And on this hike, I guess it was slippery. It had just rained, and Kyle went ahead of the group. And by the time she fell off a cliff, sincerely, she fell off a cliff and died. And by the time everyone caught up, it was too late. And Austen was 7 years old. Imagine being 7, going on a hike. Your sister literally falls off a cliff and dies and never comes home. Like Austen, he talked about, feeling like she, would come home. And, when you're 7 and this happens, you, as a therapist, I know all the little things his little brain did. Like, maybe it was my fault. Maybe I should have been with her. Maybe, and maybe not stuff that he's verbalized, but I promise you his little brain somehow made it his fault, or, there's trauma there that I am going to assume that he's never dealt with based on A, his behaviors, but B, the fact that he's a man. And, unfortunately, men think that, processing emotions or therapy is somehow weak, which is, I don't know if that's his assumption, but my point is that imagine, so you move to a new place and then you go on a hike, your sister dies, and your family is forever changed. So I think he just has a ton of unresolved trauma. But the thing with Taylor that most people don't know is, so Taylor's brother died June 8th of 2023. So I don't know when the taping for Southern Charm was. I did forget to look that up. But her brother died suddenly. He was only 36 years old. They didn't say what he died from when I was doing my research. If you do know what happened, please contact me. But so Taylor's brother dies on 6/8/23. And last year, during the reunion, Taylor made it clear that her sister Katie was battling ovarian cancer. And I did a little bit of research. So 5 years ago, Taylor's sister Katie underwent what she termed holistic treatment for ovarian cancer, and she was in remission for 4.5 years. And then it came back on January 27th, 23rd, because Taylor had done a post about her sister's cancer coming back. So essentially what I think is going on here is that Austen and Taylor are, for lack of a better term, kind of like grief bonded. Taylor cried during the reunion last year and just said, I feel for Austen because, he lost his sister and I'm going through this with my sister and I can't imagine. And then of course she did lose her brother. So I think that Taylor and Austen have a grief bond. Some people might call it a trauma bond. To me, trauma bonds are a little bit different. But so what a grief bond is essentially, and I've seen this happen where when you go through a seriously traumatic event of losing someone in your family suddenly or traumatically, or you have something really serious happen to you, it can make you feel very isolated and alone because you feel that nobody understands your pain and what you've gone through. So when you find another person who you can, with people who have heavy grief, you can see it in their soul. I mean, you can, if you're trained enough or if you've experienced it, this will resonate with you. You can see it in their soul. You can feel it in your bones. You can feel that this person fully gets what I'm feeling. And so I think for Taylor and Austen, they both just, that kind of brought them together and made them feel like, wait a second, we've both lost siblings. Should we do this? I don't know. I could be wrong. That's just my honest assessment of it. I think that also, Shep, I don't know Shep's history, to be fair. I did try to do a little bit of research about it. I couldn't find much. But in my estimation, I have a lot more empathy towards Austen because of his situation. I think Shep is just kind of an emotionally unavailable, entitled, emotionally immature person. I think that he and Austen are not ever going to be able to commit or give women what they need until they deal with their own stuff, right? So for Austen, I think that means dealing with this unresolved trauma. And Shep, I don't know. I just think maybe it's more personality characteristics with him. And I don't know that that's going to change so much. And, maybe it will. Maybe Taylor wasn't the right person for him and he'll meet someone and, prove me wrong. But I just think, for me, here's the evidence that I'm going to share to support this. So, the last Southern Charm episode, Shep compared women to toys, which I think was super telling and not an accident, and that Austen only wants the toys that Shep has. And I do believe that Shep sees women as property and things to be played with temporarily. I do think his analogy was more telling than he meant it to be, but you can't get past this brain right here. So you're not going to get away with that with me. So I think that's sincerely how Shep looks at women. I think that Shep encouraged Austen to be close to Taylor so that he could maintain power and control over her, which I posted that on my Instagram page. I posted, oh, what a tangled web we weave when we ask our best friend to maintain contact with our ex to have power and control over her. So I was like, oh, is that not the saying? But sincerely, I think that what's going on with Austen and Taylor is one thing, and then the Shep and Olivia of it all is another, because I think I understand why they're drawn to each other, but not cool at all. Seeing Olivia cry and be so tearful about that, I like felt her emotions when she and Taylor were talking. She was so betrayed, and she was so, it's like Taylor was her best friend, and you're going to have a conversation with Austen about, like, should we be together, and not talk to Olivia about that. It's just so, the point is that I can tell with Taylor and Austen that they're leading with chaos and trauma. And I can tell that. And I can tell that they're both hurting, I think, from their own respective things. I think Taylor had this stuff going on in her family, and then she was sent reeling by Shep. And I think Austen had his trauma, and then he was sent reeling by his own stuff with Olivia, because it was his fault. Olivia was like, yeah, let's do it. Fine. And then he's like, nope, just kidding, a week later. So I think that there's, separate issues going on here. The last thing that I want to say is that JT calling his mom mommy multiple times is so interesting to me, and I just cannot wait to watch more of JT. I have some clinical interpretations on this. So he was, JT, it showed him doing his insulin shots because he is a type 1 diabetic. So growing up in my family, I have a lot of people on my mom's side who are type 1 diabetics. In fact, diabetes is one of the few chronic health issues that I don't have, surprisingly. I have a lot of other ones, but not that one. So I don't think people don't often realize that type 1 diabetes is super deadly. It's really dangerous in young kids. And so my clinical interpretation of this is that when you have a child who has a chronic health condition as a child, and they rely on a parent to literally keep them alive, because sincerely, that is what it is. It's lots of blood sugar testing, and in the middle of the night, I mean, type 1 diabetes parents out there, I see you, you're rock stars. It's hard. People have no idea how hard it is. So my point is that I think that JT learned to really rely on his mom for his diabetes treatment until he was able to do it himself. And I think that created a very interesting bond with his mommy. I think a grown man, when I hear a grown man say that about his mom, it just tells me that, there's a love there, there's a closeness, but it also does tell me why he's still single, because for women, he's got to make room for another woman in his life. And it seems like right now mom's number one, which fine, fair enough. If that's the case, maybe he's just not ready, but he's probably going to have to work on that. So everyone, that is it. Thank you so much for listening to this extra long episode. I hope that you have sincerely enjoyed it. I appreciate all of you for being here. So for today, I will say, take care of yourself and each other and be the light in the world that you want to see. Until next time. Disclaimer: posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.